A very, very warm welcome to all of you. Today we will start with civics, right? And we'll be doing the chapter 3, that is types of government. Right? It's a very interesting chapter, and I know for a fact that you will all enjoy this, right? Okay, so I am very excited for this session, right? And what we have upcoming for this chapter is that we will be learning of the different kinds of governments that exist, what kind of government exists in India. Then we'll talk about the different organs of the government, and all is very it's a nice and a fun chapter. So let's see what we have from the very beginning, right? So what is the government first, right? Now, students, government is basically, we say, the government is not doing this. You often hear, like, right? So the government is not doing that. Moment you hear, open the news channels, that's what you come across, right? But what is a government, right? So a government is a group of people that manages the country, okay? It is a body of people that frames the policies and exercises control through various organizations and laws. Okay, so the group of people who manage the country, frame policies, and exercise control through various organizations and laws. Now, government is very important. Why? Because it is the key to the growth and development of a nation, and it performs varied levels of functions, right? So when I talk about functions, so let us look at the different kind of functions the government perform. How vast, when I say that, the functions of the government are vast, right? They manage the country. Government is responsible for managing the whole country. What kind of functions do they have, right? So let us look at the functions of the government. So firstly, government takes up a lot of social welfare programs, right? When I say social welfare programs, with regards to education, healthcare, right? So for example, during the current crisis, during the COVID pandemic, government is doing a lot, if you all know. So you have a lot of places where there's free testing, right? Apart from that, you have, if you all know about midday meal scheme, right? So to promote education, so for health, education, livelihood of the people, government takes up a lot of social welfare programs, right? So that people can have a better life. Okay, then maintaining law and order. Okay, so you have all of these courts, you have police, traffic police, to maintain law and order, right? That is a part of the government. Next, maintaining peaceful relations with neighbors. Now, this currently we have a issue going on with China, right, on our border. So, what the government tries to do, government tries to maintain peaceful relations with our neighbors, right? We're not always in a war with our neighbors like Pakistan, China, right? So how is that possible? Because the government, it's the function of the government that we are at peace with our neighbors. It is important. You cannot always be in a state of war, right? So this is the function of the government, to ensure that peaceful relations are maintained. Next is protects our international borders. So what is happening right now at the LAC, line of actual control, or the LOC, right? LAC is the border between India and China, right? So they came into our territory, and we're trying to push them back. That's what's happening. The fact is that, again, once again, why is the government intervening? Because this is the function of the government, to protect our international borders, right? Next is organizes relief work. So currently, as I said just now, during the COVID pandemic, government is doing a lot. Then you have floods. Last year, you had massive floods in Kerala, in Bihar, right? Even in Assam. So government goes and tries to give as much as relief as possible, right? So government organizes a lot of relief work. Next is builds and maintains public amenities. Now, when I say public amenities, what I'm talking about is maintaining roads. You have these hospitals like AIMS, and there are a lot of government hospitals, right? So, public amenities, roads, railways, right? Things, parks. If you have a park outside your house, that is maintained by the government, right? Things that people can use, all of that comes under public amenities, which is built and maintained by the government. Then services like postal communication and transportation, so all your postal services are that are spread as wide as to the, you know, deepest parts of India, right? Farthest parts of India as well, all of them, everywhere, communication, transportation, the road network. You can go to Ladakh, you can go to Kanyakumari, you can go to any place. This system of roads and transportation, communication, and all of these services are again provided by the government. Next is it builds and runs hospitals, schools, and other offices to implement all of these functions, right? So you have a lot of government offices even around you. Start looking at them, and they're all built by the government to implement and execute their functions, right? So this was about just what the government does. You can clearly see, right? Government affects, impacts, and works on each and every day of our lives, right? Everything. Relief work, international borders, international diplomacy, building and running hospitals, schools, social welfare programs for the people, law and order, amenities, organizing relief work. So they have a lot of work on their hands, right? Now, levels of the government. How does the government go about going? These are a lot of work, right? This is a lot of work, students. If you can see, I don't know if you realize this or not, but this is a lot of work, right? This is not just one job. For example, you come to school and you study, and that's about it. And maybe, yes, you go back home and you restudy it and you do your homework, but that's about it, right? This is everything that you can think of when it comes to a country. So how does the government perform this, right? Now, government divides the work. What do? They divide the work at the national level, state level, and the local level. Okay. So national level looks after the affairs of the entire country, wherein the security comes, your transportation, the major highway network comes in, right? Your railways come in. So things that are that are impacted by the entire country, right, come in your central. So you have currency, the national banks, right? All of this comes under the national level. Then state, affairs of the state. For example, if you have state hospitals, then you have schools that are run by the state. Education, you have education boards, state education boards as well, right, wherein you have state centric education. Okay. Then you have all of these what do you call, water supply, sewage system, right? Health, education, all of this is looked after by the state government. Okay. Then you also have local government, wherein what happens is that the local issues of the grassroots level, right? At the village level, um, at the district level, are taken up by the local government. Okay. So you have local government at towns and villages, both. Right? So at towns, you have the MCD. Delhi, you have Municipal Corporation of Delhi, MCD, right? And then you have villages also, you have the panchayat system and everything that looks after the local governance. Now, what is happening at the grassroots level? For example, if you need a well and a tank, you won't go to the state government saying that, I need a well. No, you have your own local government who can support this development of well, right? Now, this what we were talking about was levels of government. Government works at three levels: national, state, and local. Now, government also has three organs, bache, right? When I say organs of the government, what I am talking about is legislature, executive, and judiciary. I'll repeat. We just talked about the levels of the government: national, state, and local. National level ka government, state level government, and local level government. Now, what we're talking about is the organs of the government. You have legislature, executive, and judiciary. So, what is the legislature? Legislature, bache. Legislature is the lawmaking body. All the laws are made by the legislature, right? So you have state legislature as well. Otherwise, you have the parliament wherein the laws are made. I'll repeat. Legislature, what happens in a legislature? Laws are made. Where are these laws made? In the parliament, or you have state legislatures as well. Okay. Next is the executive. Executive is responsible for implementing these laws. Legislature makes the laws. These are implemented by the executive. So executive is the law implementing body of the government. These are, bache, all of these civil servants, IAS officers, if you've heard, right? Then PCS officers, that's the so all the administrative level work. These laws are made in the legislature. They are implemented by the executive. Fair enough? Laws are made in the legislature, implemented by the executive, and judiciary is the one that ensures that these laws are obeyed by the people as well as these other organs. Right? What is the work of the judiciary? Judiciary's work is that it ensures, right, that we obey these laws, and it also punishes those who do not obey them. Fair enough? So you have legislature, executive, and judiciary through which the government works. They make the laws, they implement the laws, and they ensure that these laws are obeyed. Right? Next, what we're talking about is the different types of government. Now, students, what are the different types of government? Right? We have monarchy. So monarchy is wherein a king or a queen, they rule. Right? So previously, almost everywhere you had monarchy. Almost, not definitely, but yes, mostly you had monarchy, wherein you had the rule of kings and queens used to rule, right? And the rule was hereditary. Hereditary as in that, so hereditary means that king's son would become a king, right? So that is hereditary. Okay. So this was monarchy wherein the king or the queen was ruling, right? Then you have dictatorship. Now what happens in a dictatorship is, so also students, currently you have monarchy in um, Thailand was ruled by a king. You have Bhutan ruled by a king. Nepal used to be ruled by a king. Now they are also a parliamentary form of government. But yes, so you've had till date, now very few places you have a monarch, right? But still there are a lot of places. For example, you do have kings still existing. Queen Elizabeth exists, right? Um, but then they have a different kind of government altogether. But the places where the king and the queen, they wield a lot of power, that place is known as a, that state, that country is known as a monarchy. Dictatorship. Now what is a dictatorship is, bache? Dictatorship is about when a person or a group of people, they take over a country, and the people do not want that. Like, it's against the people's wishes. They force themselves. So the person or the group of people, they force themselves on the other members of the country. That is known as the dictatorship, and they rule the country. There are no rights. The people do not have any rights. So for examples of dictatorship would be Hitler, right? So what Hitler's Germany was, Hitler was a dictator, and Hitler's Germany was a government ruled under dictatorship, right? So people didn't really like him, but he imposed himself through force. Okay. Next comes the unitary form of government. Now, what is a unitary form of government? Bache? Unitary form of government is basically a government wherein you have only one government for the whole country, right? For example, China and Great Britain, right? So you have one government for the whole country. But federal form, so what you have is that you have a division between the center and the state, right? So the government wherein the center has different powers and states also have their own powers is known as federal form of government. Unitary form of government is when there is a single government for all the for the entire country, for example, Britain and China. And federal forms examples would be India and USA, wherein states have their own powers and center has its own powers. Right? That's federal form of government. Okay. Next you have but a democracy. Right? So we are a democratic government, right? And also I want to talk about why do you think democracy is important, right? So you have to understand this, students, that democracy is very important and it is the best form of government because common people has a say. They have a say, right? Common people, they have a say in terms of the laws they want. They can elect their own representatives, right? So that is the reason why democracy is the best kind of government that we can have, right? And Abraham Lincoln, he defined democracy as the government of the people, by the people, and for the people. So now what I'm going to talk about is the different types of democracy, right? When I say different types of democracy, there are two types of democracies: direct democracy and indirect democracy. So democracy, if you all recall, democracy is a government wherein people elect their own representatives, right? So direct democracy is when people they themselves make laws and policies, right, through which they are governed. Whereas in indirect democracy, people elect their representatives through which they are governed. I'll repeat. What happens in a direct democracy is, students, that in a direct democracy, people themselves, they form their own laws and rules through which they are governed. Whereas in an indirect democracy, what happens is that the people elect their representatives. So India is an example of indirect democracy. People elect their representatives, right? And that is how these elected representatives, they make the laws and rules for us, and that's how we are governed. So the direct democracy, students, now we do not find active examples of direct democracy much, but what we do have is that so direct democracy was practiced in ancient Athens, right? That's where the democracy came from, in the very place. The problem is with direct democracy is that, for countries and with large populations, it becomes very difficult. You cannot have direct democracy, right? So countries with very large populations like India, it is absolutely impossible to have direct democracy, right? Therefore we have indirect democracy, but at local level, yes, we do have direct democracy. Like, so panchayat and all of these places, you do have direct democracy. But in indirect democracy, what but otherwise you have indirect democracy, wherein the elected representatives rule on behalf of, make laws on behalf of the larger public. Okay. Next is types of democracy, the different types of democratic forms of government. All right, so the different types of democratic form of governments are parliamentary and presidential, right? So democratic forms of government are parliamentary and presidential. Now, what happens in a parliamentary government is, for parliamentary form of government, is that there are two heads, bache, right? You have the president as well as the prime minister. The president is the head of the state, but the prime minister is the head of the government. I'll repeat, in a parliamentary system, you have two heads of the state. You have the president as well as the prime minister. President is the head of the state, but prime minister is the head of the government, right? There are two heads. I'll repeat, president and prime minister. President is the head of the state, but prime minister is the head of the government, right? Next thing is that the president is indirectly elected, right? Through president is indirectly elected through the elected representatives from the people. So the elected representatives of the people later on elect the president, right? And also, bache, the executive is a part of the legislative branch. What I mean by that is that executives are chosen from among the parliamentarians and president is indirectly elected. Also, there is no complete separation of powers. Example is India and UK. So India and UK are examples of parliamentary form of government. And I'll just explain this again to you because this can be a bit tricky. So first is that there are two heads, right? One is the head of the government, head of the state, sorry, which is the president, and prime minister is the head of the government, right? Next is executives are chosen from the parliamentarians and the president is indirectly elected. What I mean by this is that elections happen, right? And after elections, the party that wins, they form the executive. So elections happen and those who, the elected leaders become parliamentarians and the executives are chosen from the parliamentarians while the president is indirectly elected, right? So there is no complete separation of power between the executive and the legislature. Whereas what happens in presidential form of government is that the president is both the head of the state and the government. President is both the head of the state and the government. He has the liberty to appoint his own ministers and carry the administration, right? Also, the president is generally directly elected by the people. For example, USA, right? The president is directly elected by the people and there is a complete separation of power between the executive and the legislature. Here, there is no complete, there is not a complete separation of power between the executive and the legislature, but in presidential form of government, there is a complete separation of power between the executive and the legislature. Presidents are elected for a fixed term, right? And it's very difficult to remove a president. A president wields a lot of power in the presidential form of government, bache, right? And he can only be removed by a very difficult procedure known as impeachment. For example, USA, right? So once again, what is the presidential form of government? Wherein the president has a lot of powers. He is both the head of the state and the government. He has the ability to appoint his own ministers, carry out his own administration, right? Although subjected to the Congress, subjected to ratification through the Congress, but still it is a lot easier for him to work, right? He is directly elected by the people, although it's mostly for a fixed tenure. And his removal is very difficult, right? But there is a complete separation of power between executive and legislature. Fair enough? Whereas in a parliamentary form of government, the president is the head of the state, but prime minister is the head of the government, right? So executives are chosen through are chosen from the parliamentarians who are directly elected by the people, while the president is indirectly elected, right? And there is not a complete separation of powers. That's about parliamentary and presidential form of government. Next is democracy, the biggest and the most essential feature, what makes democracy and what gives democracy the stature it deserves as the best form of government is the fact that everyone can vote, right? All the adult citizens can vote, right? So everyone above the age of 18, they can all vote. This is known as universal adult franchise, right? And it is a norm. It has now become a norm for most of the countries, but for a long time, this was not the case, right? For a long time, what used to happen was that only initially only men used to were allowed to vote. Even then, slaves were not given the right to vote. Landless people weren't given the right to vote, right? Peasants weren't given right to vote. So this has come about through massive years, decades, right, and centuries of struggle, right? But now universal adult franchise means all adult citizens, people above the age of 18 in a country have a right to vote. The poor, rich, men, women, Hindu, Muslim, Christian, Sikh, Buddhist, everyone, right? Everyone has equal voting rights. Vote of each person carries equal weight irrespective of economic status, caste, gender, religion, right? And we've achieved this after many years of struggle, bache. Right? With this we complete this chapter, right? So thank you so much. I hope, one second, I'll just very quickly go through um, everything that we've studied so far. So we initially started with what is the government, right? Then we looked at the functions of the government. Next, what we looked at was the different levels of the government, the national level, state level, and the local level government, right? Followed by the organs of the government. How do they work? They work through legislature, executive, and the judiciary. Legislature makes the laws, executive implements the laws, while the judiciary ensures that these laws are obeyed. Then the different types of government that we talked about monarchy, dictatorship, unitary form, federal form, right? Monarchy ruled by king or queen, dictatorship when a person or a group of people um, without the public acceptance, they rule over the state, right? Unitary form is when there is a single government for the entire country. Federal form wherein there is a division between the state and the center, right? The state and center have different powers. Then the different types of democracy, you have direct democracy and indirect democracy. Direct democracy wherein people directly vote, directly make their own laws and policies. Indirect democracy wherein, for example, India and most of the countries today practicing democracy, wherein what happens in an indirect democracy is that the people make their elect representatives who rule on their behalf, right? Then the different types of democracies, the different types of democratic forms of government, right? Democratic forms of government are parliamentary and presidential. In presidential, the president is both the head of the state and the government. He is very powerful, right? And there is a complete separation between executive and legislature, whereas in a parliamentary form of government, the president is the head of the state, right? But the prime minister is the head of the government. President is indirectly elected. Prime minister and the executive are chosen from the parliamentarians who are directly elected, right? Also, there is not a complete separation of powers. Lastly, what we talked about, what makes democracy so beautiful and the best form of government is the fact that universal adult franchise, wherein people above 18, everyone have the right to vote. With this, we end this chapter. I hope you all enjoyed and had fun learning about the different types of government with me. Have a nice day and take care. Stay safe. Thank you.